The CSS Starweaver's observation deck offered a panoramic view of the Andromeda Arm, but Captain Sarah Chen found no comfort in the cosmic display. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her reflection in the reinforced plastiglass revealing the same steely expression she'd maintained since receiving her assignment. 3 weeks had passed since she became the first human to command a Confederation vessel, and the silence in the corridors spoke volumes about how well that was going. The door whispered open behind her. First Officer Khazar's distinctive four-fingered hand appeared in her peripheral vision, offering a datapad. The Nixilian's scaled skin caught the starlight, iridescent patterns shifting across his ceremonial markings. "The crew efficiency reports you requested, Captain," he said, voice carefully neutral. "Though I must note that our performance metrics exceeded acceptable parameters under previous command structures." Chen accepted the pad without turning. "And yet we're operating at 60% of potential capacity, Officer Khazar. The Starweaver was built for more than routine patrol duties." She finally faced her XO, meeting his vertical pupilled gaze. "I've reviewed your service record. 15 years of exemplary command experience. I imagine having a human captain wasn't exactly what you expected for your next assignment." Khazar's secondary breathing slits flared slightly, a tell she'd learned to recognize as discomfort. "With respect, Captain, humanity's military history makes many of us uncertain. Your species achieved faster-than-light travel barely 30 years ago, yet your combat doctrines have already revolutionized 3 major conflicts. Some worry that humans see everything as a battlefield waiting to happen. And what do you think, XO? I think that despite the Confederation Council's decision, placing a human in command of our most advanced patrol vessel is premature. The crew shares this concern." Chen nodded, having expected nothing less. She turned back to the stars, but her voice carried the weight of command. 3 hours ago, I received intelligence suggesting why the Council made their choice. There's something happening in the Outer Rim territories. Ships are going dark. Colonies falling silent. The official channels are keeping it quiet to prevent panic. But she handed him a second datapad, this one requiring his highest security clearance. Khazar's pupils dilated as he absorbed the classified information. "These energy signatures, they're unlike anything in our databases, and the pattern of disappearances forms a deliberate line toward populated space," Chen finished. "The Confederation spent centuries building peace through diplomacy and technological advancement. But whatever's out there isn't interested in talking. That's why they needed someone who thinks like a soldier. The ship's alert system chose that moment to shatter their conversation, bathing the observation deck in crimson light. "Captain, to the bridge," the automated system announced. "Priority 1 distress signal detected." They moved in unison toward the bridge, professional training overriding personal tensions. The bridge crew stiffened as Chen entered, their diverse anatomies all expressing the same uncertainty about following a human's orders into potential danger. The tactical officer, a young Meridian named Hawks, spoke first. "Signal originating from Research Station Epsilon 17, Captain. It's at the edge of the silent zone." Chen took her command chair, feeling the weight of every eye on the bridge. This wasn't just her first crisis as the Starweaver's captain. It was humanity's first real test in commanding Confederation forces. The next few minutes would either validate or destroy everything the Council had worked toward. "Show me the station's location," she ordered. The holographic display bloomed to life, showing Epsilon 17's position relative to the pattern of silent colonies. It sat directly in the path of whatever force was methodically erasing Confederation presence from the Outer Rim. Khazar studied the display, his tactical experience evident in his posture. "Standard protocol for a research station distress call requires us to wait for backup before engaging. The nearest support vessel is 3 hours away. In 3 hours, that station could become another silent point on our map," Chen replied. She stood, addressing the bridge crew directly. "I know none of you wanted a human captain. You've heard stories about us, that we're aggressive, unpredictable, dangerous. Maybe some of those stories are even true. But right now, there are 200 civilians on that station who need help. I'm not ordering you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust that when lives are at stake, humanity's worst qualities become our greatest strengths. The bridge remained silent for a long moment. Then Tok straightened at his station. Plotting fastest approach vector to Epsilon 17, Captain. We can be there in 17 minutes at maximum burn. One by one, the other officers turned to their stations, preparations for potential combat humming through the ship. Khazar moved to his position at Chen's right hand, his expression thoughtful. The crew will follow your orders, Captain. But they'll be watching to see if humanity's reputation for victory comes at too high a price. Chen's fingers brushed the worn metal strip on her collar, her great-grandfather's infantry insignia from humanity's first steps into space. Then let's show them how humans fight when we're protecting something worth dying for. Helm, set course for Epsilon 17. Whatever we find out there, the Star Weaver draws the line here. As the ship's engines flared to life, Chen felt the familiar pre-combat clarity settling over her mind. She'd spent her entire career preparing for moments like this, not just to prove humanity's worth to the Confederation, but to show that the very qualities that made her species feared could become the foundation of something greater. The next few hours would determine whether the Star Weaver's crew learned to trust their human captain, or whether humanity's first command of a Confederation vessel would become its last. The stars blurred into streaks of light as the ship accelerated toward its destiny, carrying its divided crew toward a threat that would test not just their capabilities, but the very possibility of unity between their species. In the command chair, Captain Sarah Chen allowed herself a small smile. After all, humanity had always done its best work when everyone else thought failure was certain. The Star Weaver dropped out of FTL with surgical precision, its sensors immediately sweeping the space around Research Station Epsilon 17. The massive structure hung against the backdrop of a violet nebula, its usual bright operational lights reduced to sporadic flickers. Emergency containment fields shimmered across multiple hull breaches, their power signatures wavering dangerously. Life signs. Chen's question cut through the tense silence on the bridge. Tox's fingers danced across his console, his anterior sensory filaments twitching with concentration. Scattered readings throughout the station, Captain. But there's significant interference. Something's disrupting our scans. Multiple escape pods launched within the last hour, Khazar added, his scaled hands manipulating the tactical display. Most appear to have been destroyed before reaching safe distance. Energy weapons damage, but the signature doesn't match any known configuration. Chen leaned forward in her command chair, studying the holographic representation of the station. Years of human military training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now every nerve in her body was screaming that this was a trap. It was textbook, a wounded prey drawing in would-be rescuers. Maintain distance and launch probe drones, she ordered. I want eyes inside before we. The ship's sensors shrieked in alarm as something massive emerged from behind the station. The creature, if it could be called that, defied conventional physics. Its form rippled like oil on water, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Where it touched the station's hull, energy seemed to flow directly into its mass. By the first stars, someone whispered on the bridge. The entity turned toward them, and Chen felt an instinctive revulsion as patterns of bioluminescence rippled across its surface, patterns that seemed to mirror the Star Weaver's own power signature. Battle stations, she commanded, her voice steady despite the primal fear clawing at her spine. Shields to maximum. Weapons hot. The crew responded with professional efficiency, though Chen could sense their fear. This was beyond anything in Confederation records. As the creature accelerated toward them, its mass somehow both solid and fluid, she made a decision that would either validate or destroy her command. All power to forward shields and main engines. Helm, plot a collision course. Captain. Khazar's objection was immediate. The mass readings alone suggest impact would tear us apart, yes. Chen finished. But look at its movement pattern. It's not used to prey that fights back. Execute now. The Starweaver's engines flared brilliantly as the ship surged forward. The creature, perhaps sensing their intent, began to alter its course. Exactly as Chen had hoped. Hard to port, all auxiliary power to starboard weapons array. The ship heeled around with crushing force, its artificial gravity struggling to compensate. As they swung past the creature's flank, their weapons opened up at point-blank range. The entity's surface rippled violently where their fire connected, its bioluminescent patterns fluctuating wildly. Direct hits, Tox reported, excitement creeping into his usually stoic voice. The entity's energy absorption rate drops significantly when its surface cohesion is disrupted. Chen allowed herself a grim smile. Pattern recognized. It feeds on energy, but only when it can maintain surface tension. Tactical, coordinate with engineering. I want our weapon frequencies modulated to match the harmonic resonance of its surface disruption. Khazar, get me a firing solution, Fat. The creature's counterattack came with devastating speed. A tendril of its mass lashed out, bypassing their shields as if they didn't exist. Where it struck the hull, warning klaxons screamed as power systems began to fail. Multiple decks reporting critical power loss. Khazar announced. It's not just draining our energy, it's consuming it. Weapons losing coherence. Chen's mind raced. The creature's attack had confirmed her theory. It didn't just feed on energy, it processed it, adapted to it. Each moment they fought gave it more information about their systems. They needed something it couldn't adapt to, couldn't predict. Engineering, initiate core shutdown. All sections, switch to emergency power only. The orders felt like acid in her throat. Every human instinct screamed against powering down in the middle of combat. Captain, without main power, will be defenseless. Khazar's concern was valid, but Chen saw the moment understanding dawned in his alien eyes. If they couldn't fight conventionally, we're not shutting down to defend ourselves, she explained for the benefit of the crew. We're changing the game. That thing feeds on active energy signatures, so let's give it starvation shock. The Starweaver's lights dimmed as systems powered down in cascade. The creature, drawn by their previous energy output, surged forward, only to recoil as its target suddenly became energetically dark. Its surface rippled in what Chen could have sworn was confusion. Now, emergency restart, all power to weapons. Fire everything we have. The ship roared back to life, its weapons unleashing a devastating barrage at the temporarily disoriented entity. The creature's surface integrity shattered under the assault, its mass breaking apart into smaller segments that scattered into space, their bioluminescent patterns fading. Entity retreating, Captain, Tox reported, a new note of respect in his voice. Picking up clear life signs from the station now. Looks like it was interfering with our scans. 213 survivors in the main containment bunker. Chen allowed herself to breathe again, looking around at her bridge crew. Where before she had seen doubt and resistance, she now saw something new in their alien features. Consideration. They were reassessing her, reassessing humanity's reputation for aggressive problem-solving. Well done, all of you, she said, standing to survey the damage reports now flowing in. But that thing wasn't hunting alone. The pattern of colony disappearances suggests organization, purpose. This was just our first contact. She turned to Khazar. Your thoughts, XO. Khazar studied the tactical display, where the retreating energy signature of the creature was being tracked. I think, Captain, that I'm beginning to understand why the Council chose a human commander for this mission. Your species' capacity for unconventional tactics, it may be exactly what we need. Let's hope so, Chen replied, watching the rescue shuttles launch toward the station. Because something tells me this was just the preview. Whatever these things are, they've been methodically testing Confederation defenses, and now they know we can hurt them. She faced her crew, seeing in them not just acceptance now, but the beginnings of trust. So let's make sure we're ready when they come back to test that theory. The bridge hummed with renewed purpose as they began rescue operations. They had won their first encounter, but Chen knew the real battle was just beginning. The question wasn't if the entities would return. It was how many they would bring with them when they did. The survivors' words hung in the air of the Star Weaver's briefing room like a death sentence. They're not just feeding. They're building something. Dr. Venna, the research station's lead xenobiologist, manipulated the holographic display with trembling hands. Her Arcturian features were drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with urgency. Every colony they consume adds to their collective mass. They're not just a species. They're becoming a hive. Captain Chen studied the data scrolling across the display. In the 3 days since their encounter at Epsilon 17, 5 more colonies had gone dark. The Confederation Council was still debating an official response, but the patterns were clear. The entities were accelerating their expansion. "Show me the energy consumption rates again," she requested, noting how Kizar leaned forward with similar interest. The first officer had been unusually quiet since their battle, spending hours analyzing their encounter data. The hologram shifted, displaying a graph of exponential growth. Each entity absorbs not just energy, but the very technology they consume, Dr. Venna explained. They learn from it, adapt it. The more advanced the technology they absorb, the more efficiently they can process new energy sources, which explains why they're targeting Confederation installations. Kazar interjected. They're not just feeding, they're evolving. Chen's fingers drummed against the briefing table, a human gesture of concentration that had initially unnerved her alien crew, but now seemed to comfort them, a sign their captain was deep in tactical analysis. Dr. Venna, in your observation, do these entities show any signs of sentience? Any attempt at communication? The xenobiologist's skin darkened. An Arcturian sign of distress. We tried everything. Different energy patterns, electromagnetic frequencies, even physical vibrations. They respond only to energy sources they can consume. It's like trying to negotiate with a forest fire. Then we need to contain them, Chen concluded, standing to address the assembled senior staff. Every installation they absorb makes them stronger, more adaptable. If they reach a populated system, the Council will never approve a preemptive strike, Khazar warned. The Confederation was founded on principles of peaceful first contact. Even in the face of hostile species, we must attempt diplomatic. There's nothing to diplomacy with. Chen's fist struck the table, her frustration finally breaking through. Every minute we wait, trying to communicate with something that sees us only as food, more people die. More colonies fall. More of these things are born. The briefing room fell silent. Chen looked around at her senior staff, beings from a dozen different species, all watching her with a mixture of concern and growing understanding. She took a deep breath, centering herself. I've studied Confederation history, she continued, her voice calmer. I know why these protocols exist. Humanity's own history is full of tragic first contact scenarios, assumptions of hostility that led to needless conflict. But this is different. These entities aren't misunderstood. They're an infection, and infections don't negotiate. Khazar's secondary breathing slits flared. But this time, Chen recognized it as consideration rather than discomfort. What are you proposing, Captain? Chen activated the tactical display, showing the pattern of colony disappearances. They're building something, yes, but they're still bound by physics. Energy can't be created or destroyed, only transformed. Even their adaptive abilities have limits. What we need is a way to overwhelm those limits. The station's research, Dr. Venna suddenly interjected, her massive eyes widening. Before they attacked, we were studying quantum field manipulation. The ability to create controlled energy cascades that could overload their ability to process energy, Chen finished. Force them to absorb more than they can adapt to. It would require an enormous power source, Khazar noted, his tactical mind already analyzing possibilities, and precise timing. Too little energy, they adapt. Too much spread out over too long. They divide and spawn. Chen nodded. It needs to be sudden, overwhelming, and distributed across their entire collective mass. She manipulated the display, highlighting a particular sector. There's a reason they've been moving in this pattern. They're being drawn to the largest energy source in the region, the Helios Array. The room erupted in objections. The Helios Array was the pride of Confederation engineering, a massive solar collection facility that powered nearly a quarter of their space. The mere suggestion of using it as a weapon was practically sacrilege. Listen to me. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. The array is their ultimate target. Once they absorb its energy processing capabilities, nothing in Confederation space will be able to stop them. But if we can lure their entire collective there, use the array to channel an overwhelming surge. You're talking about sacrificing our greatest achievement, one of the engineers protested. Decades of work, trillions in resources. I'm talking about saving lives, Chen countered. About stopping this threat before it becomes unstoppable. Yes, it's an extreme solution. Yes, it violates Confederation protocols. But right now, we're not just fighting for colonies or resources. We're fighting for survival. Khazar stood, drawing all eyes to him. As first officer, his opinion carried enormous weight. When the Council assigned a human captain to the Starweaver, many of us questioned their wisdom. We saw humanity's aggressive problem-solving as a liability. He paused, looking directly at Chen. But perhaps that is exactly what we need. Sometimes preservation requires destruction. Sometimes wisdom looks like madness to those who have never faced extinction. One by one, the senior staff began to nod. They had all seen the footage from Epsilon 17, had all processed the data showing the entity's exponential growth. The time for conventional responses had passed. The Council will never approve this plan, Chen acknowledged, which is why we're not going to tell them. Not until it's done. She looked at each of her officers in turn. I won't order any of you to participate. This is volunteer only. If we succeed, we'll probably all face court-martial. If we fail, there won't be courts left to marshal us. Khazar finished. He straightened to attention. I volunteer, Captain. Like a wave, the other officers stood. Even Dr. Venna rose, her scientist's caution overridden by the memory of what she'd witnessed. Chen felt a surge of pride. Not in herself, but in this crew that had moved from suspicion to trust, from resistance to resolution. Plot a course for the Helios Array, she ordered, and pray we're not too late, because one way or another, this ends there. The Starweaver's engines hummed to life, carrying its crew toward a confrontation that would either save the Confederation or doom them all. In her mind, Chen was already planning the battle to come, a battle that would test not just their weapons and tactics, but the very bonds of trust they had forged. The Helios Array stretched across space like a metallic web, its solar collectors gleaming in the light of 3 suns. From the Starweaver's bridge, Captain Chen watched the massive structure with a mixture of awe and regret. Soon, this marvel of engineering would become either humanity's greatest sacrifice or their greatest failure. Multiple entity signatures detected, Tox reported, his sensory filaments rigid with tension. They're following us, Captain, just as you predicted. How many? Khazar asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. All of them. Chen's voice was quiet but firm. They've committed their entire collective to this pursuit. The bait was too tempting. A Confederation warship leading them straight to the largest power source in the sector. The tactical display told the story. Hundreds of the energy-consuming entities had merged into a vast, undulating mass that followed in their wake, growing larger with each passing moment as more of their kind joined the collective. The creature they'd faced at Epsilon 17 now seemed tiny in comparison. Engineering reports the quantum cascade device is ready, Khazar announced. Dr. Vena's modifications are holding stable, but she says we'll only get one chance. Once we initiate the sequence, the array's containment systems will fail catastrophically. Chen nodded, her mind already racing through contingencies. The plan was audacious. Some would say suicidal. They would use the Star Weaver to lure the collective into the heart of the array, then trigger a controlled overload of its energy collection systems. The resulting quantum cascade would theoretically overwhelm the entity's ability to process energy, destroying them all in one massive surge. Theoretically. Status of civilian evacuation. Array personnel are at 97% cleared, Khazar reported. The last transport leaves in 10 minutes. But Captain. He hesitated, mandibles clicking in concern. The calculations are clear. Someone has to remain aboard to manually trigger the cascade. The radiation surge will prevent remote activation. I know. Chen's response was simple, final. She turned to address her bridge crew. You've all served with honor, far beyond what I could have asked. When we return to Confederation space, when we return. Khazar interrupted, his scales shifting color with emotion. Captain, you can't mean to. The Star Weaver needs her first officer. Chen cut him off. Someone who understands both Confederation protocol and when to break it. Someone who has learned to balance caution with necessary action. She managed a small smile. Besides, it's a human tradition. The captain goes down with the ship. That's not your tradition, Khazar countered. I studied human military history since you took command. That phrase, it means the captain stays to ensure the crew's survival. You've already done that. Let me. The ship shuddered as the first wave of entities reached the array's outer collectors. Warnings flared across multiple stations as the massive structure began to lose power. They're feeding on the array faster than predicted. Tox reported urgently. Primary systems failing. We're losing our window. Chen straightened, her decision made. Helm. Plot a course through the array's main collection hub. Engineering. Begin quantum cascade sequence. Khazar, you have command of the Star Weaver. Get our people clear. Captain. Khazar began, but Chen held up a hand. 3 months ago, none of you wanted a human captain, she said, looking around at her crew. You saw us as dangerous, unpredictable. Maybe we are, but sometimes the universe needs a little human unpredictability. She removed her command insignia and held it out to Khazar. Take it. That's an order. Khazar's hand closed around the insignia, his alien features conveying a depth of emotion that transcended species. It has been an honor, Sarah Chen. The honor was mine. She turned to Tox. Initiate emergency transport to array control. And Tox. The young officer looked up. Keep studying those human military histories. We're full of surprises. The transport beam engaged, and Chen materialized in the array's central control room. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the entity collective spreading across the structure like a living shadow, consuming everything in its path. Her fingers flew across the control panels, initiating the carefully planned sequence that would turn the array into a weapon. Starweaver status. Clear of the blast radius. Khazar's voice came through. The collective is fully engaged with the array. They've taken the bait. Good. Chen watched as critical systems began to overload, power readings climbing beyond safety limits. Khazar, tell the Council this wasn't their fault. Sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones. We will remember, Captain. Your sacrifice will not be. Static cut off his words as the entities began to interfere with communications. Chen smiled grimly, watching the final countdown begin. The collective had nearly reached the control room, drawn by the power signatures she was generating. They didn't understand that some forms of hunger were simply too dangerous to feed. As warnings blared and systems reached critical levels, Shen thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had come aboard the Starweaver to prove that humans could lead in peace as well as war. Instead, she had proven something far more important, That true leadership transcended species. That trust could be built even across the walls of prejudice and fear. The entities breached the outer door just as she hit the final command sequence. As the quantum cascade began, bathing everything in brilliant light, Chen stood at attention. She was no longer just a human captain or a Confederation officer. She was the bridge between two ways of thinking, proof that sometimes the most alien thing of all was understanding. The array erupted in a blaze of energy that lit up half the sector, and Sarah Chen became light itself. 3 weeks after the Helios event, First Officer, now Captain, Khazar stood before the Confederation Council. The chamber's sweeping architecture usually inspired awe, but today it felt heavy with judgment. Representatives from 100 species waited in tiered seats, their varied anatomies all oriented toward the evidence displays, showing the destruction of their greatest technological achievement. "The array is gone," Khazar stated, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "But so are the entities. Every colony, every outpost in their path, now stands secure. We estimate the collective would have reached the core worlds within 2 standard months. Instead, we count our losses in credits rather than lives." Through an act of unilateral destruction, one council member objected, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns of disapproval. Captain Chen violated dozens of protocols. Captain Chen saved the Confederation. The new voice came from Dr. Vena, standing at Khazar's side. The xenobiologist's usually timid demeanor had vanished, replaced by fierce conviction. "I studied these entities. They were beyond diplomacy, beyond containment. They would have consumed everything." Khazar activated a holographic display, showing the final sensor readings from the array. The quantum cascade didn't just destroy them, it revealed them. In their death throes, we finally saw their true nature. The image zoomed in, showing complex patterns in the entity's energy signatures. They were artificial, weapons created by someone or something to harvest technological civilizations. And they were working. A murmur ran through the chamber. The council's head speaker, an ancient Meridian, leaned forward. "You have evidence of this. We have proof." Khazar's scaled hand moved through the display, bringing up detailed analysis. Their behavioral patterns, their evolution rate, their targeting priorities, all engineered. Someone sent them to test our defenses, to learn our capabilities. And we were failing that test until Captain Chen showed us another way. A human way, someone muttered from the gallery. But there was less condemnation in the words than there might have been months ago. "Yes," Khazar acknowledged, straightening to his full height. "A human way." When the Confederation admitted Earth to membership, many questioned whether humanity's aggressive problem-solving and unconventional tactics would disrupt our carefully balanced protocols. Captain Chen proved those questions were asking the wrong thing. We shouldn't have worried about disruption. We should have recognized its value. He gestured to the tactical displays showing the entity collective's predicted expansion. "Our protocols exist for good reasons. They prevent conflict, encourage understanding, promote peace. But they assume our opponents share those goals." Captain Chen understood what we did not, that sometimes survival requires us to change our thinking, to act decisively even when our instincts tell us to wait and observe. The chamber had grown quiet, every being present caught between centuries of tradition and the undeniable logic of Khazar's words. The head speaker's sensory filaments wavered thoughtfully. "And what would you have us learn from this, Captain Khazar?" That diversity of thought is not just an ideal, it's a tactical advantage. That the very qualities we feared in humanity might be essential to our survival. Khazar's secondary breathing slits flared with emotion. Captain Chen died believing in more than victory. She believed that different species, different philosophies, could make each other stronger. Her final orders were not about destroying the array. They were about preserving the trust we had built. The display shifted to the Starweaver's bridge recordings from those final moments. Chen's voice filled the chamber. "Sometimes the universe needs a little human unpredictability." She was right, Khazar continued. The entities failed because they could predict our responses, could count on our adherence to protocol. They hadn't accounted for human ingenuity combined with Confederation resources. They hadn't planned for a leader who could both understand our caution and transcend it when necessary. Dr. Venna stepped forward, her massive eyes gleaming with unused tears. The array can be rebuilt, but Captain Chen gave us something far more valuable, a new way of thinking. A proof that strength lies not in rigid adherence to tradition, but in the ability to adapt, to trust, to learn from those we once feared. The council chambers erupted in discussion, arguments and counter-arguments flying between representatives. But Khazar noticed something different in their debate, a new willingness to consider uncomfortable ideas, to question comfortable assumptions. Chen's sacrifice had done more than save them from the entities. It had shown them a path forward. 3 days later, Khazar stood on the Starweaver's observation deck, watching the stars wheel past. The ship had new orders now, to patrol the borders where the entities had first appeared, watching for signs of their creators. But more importantly, it had a new crew composition. At the Council's direction, every Confederation vessel would now include officers from multiple species, including humans, in command positions. Captain, Tox called from his station. The new personnel transfers are aboard, ready to get underway. Khazar touched the command insignia he wore, not Chen's original, which had been lost in the array's destruction, but a new design. It combined traditional Confederation symbols with the angular lines of human military ranks. A small change, but a meaningful one. "Take us out, Lieutenant," he ordered. "There are more threats out there, more tests to come. Let's show them what humanity taught us about facing the impossible." The Starweaver's engines hummed to life, carrying its diverse crew into the unknown. On its hull, freshly painted beneath the Confederation emblem, was a new motto in multiple languages. The human version read simply, "Ad astra per aspera," to the stars through hardship. Somewhere out there, Khazar knew, other artificial entities might be waiting. Other weapons might be testing other civilizations. But thanks to Sarah Chen, the Confederation had learned perhaps the most human lesson of all, that the greatest strength lies not in perfect unity, but in the courage to trust our differences. The stars stretched into streaks of light as the ship went to FTL, carrying forward a legacy born in sacrifice and preserved in change. The price of trust had been high, but its value was beyond measure.